All right, so I'd like to call the financial affairs meeting to order. So we'll start off with a roll call, starting with Ms. Haywood.
Present.
Bowman. Here. Ms. Moore. Here. Mr. Mr. Sharp. You like pointed, I'm like, did I miss like a somebody?
Present.
Mr. Riddell Williams,
Present.
Mr. Epps,
Present.
Mr. Fishbein.
Go Birds.
Present.
And I'm present, Ms. Henry. Can I have a motion to approve last month's meetings minutes?
So moved.
Second, William Mulvey. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Aye, and so the minutes are approved. I will turn it over to Mr. Spiker for the meeting.
Good, thank you, Pam. I'm here to take all the fun out of the air to talk about. So I'll start off by talking about the interim financial statements. I will give in the hour of the night, and that a lot of the information is the same on the interim statements. I will cruise through this at a pretty high level. So again, when we look at the balance sheet from January to January, this is a cash basis balance sheet. We are cash focused. We see an increase of $11.2 million from year to year, and we are happy to see such a large increase. Is very indicative of a future surplus at the end of this. More to come on that. Now that we're entering the month of January and month of February, we'll start to flip this into rather than a comparative, a projected through the end of the year, and have that information as well. And we try to guesstimate what we're going to do. All right, looking at the year-to-date operations, you can see our revenues are coming in much stronger than the prior year. We obviously increased our real estate tax rate. Local revenues. We're also seeing increases in interest earnings and some other local revenues that a little bit last month. The federal revenue is starting to come in. Some of this revenue is actually money coming in from last year. So there will be an adjustment at the end of the year, but this cash flow is opened up. We're seeing some more funding going for federal sources. On the expenditure side, we've talked about some of the changes in the past. We have delays in billings from the IU, which are, it looks like we have decreasing regular programs, which is our charter school regular tuition and our teacher salaries, but in reality, we're just waiting on some bills. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing any sort of decrease at the end because of that catching up. Overall, it's unusual given the year we have salary increases, PSERS increases, medical increases, that we'd be on January 31st and still looking at the same expenditures on a year-to-year basis. You can see we're showing $59 million in expenditures this year versus $6 million last year, only a change of $53,000. Like I said, we're still lagging on some of these bills. It'll catch up and we will surpass the prior year. Again, for those who still like to see our financials in this format by object, it's presented. And a continuation of our structural revenue versus expenditures chart. You can see that red line on a very linear path headed towards the end of the school year. We do have some debt service payments in June, so it's not going to be entirely linear. We'll have a jump at the end of the year. But so far, the trajectory is good. There's no cause for alarm. All right, next item on the agenda is looking at the preliminary budget. So I'm going to emphasize preliminary in this budget. There's still a lot of information we're waiting for, from the very simple things like how our real estate tax-based assessment is going to shape up when we get to the end of the year, to what is the governor's budget going to look like and how much is on the school district. or not fund the school district, we hope fund the school district, more than likely fund the school district. So we're still waiting on a lot of key pieces of information. I think a more accurate picture is probably on the expenditure side of some of the things we're talking about tonight. But overall, you can see we're looking at $130 million in revenues and $130 million in expenditures. And currently, we're balancing the budget by considering using $2.6 million in fund balance. So what does that $2.6 million equate to? If it were to be a tax increase, it would be a 2.75% tax increase, if that's the direction we're headed. Again, we still have a long way to go to really nail down and talk about what that could be. On the expenditure side, this isn't a year where we added debt. This is a year where we saw a decrease in our pension contribution rate. This is a year where we saw an average increase in our medical expenditures. But overall, what's going to drive this budget are salaries and benefits for this year, mostly salaries, with everything else staying flat. We'll take a look at the changes in the next slide. So I thought it would be useful to talk about how we got from our prior year revenue budget of 127 million to our now current budget of 130 million. And I broke it down into three main categories: local sources, state sources, and federal sources. On the local side, we are currently showing an increase of $525,000 in real estate taxes, which includes delinquent collections, real estate taxes, and interims. And this is a mix of a drop in expected interim taxes to be collected and increase in expected real estate taxes to be collected, increase in our budgeted delinquent taxes to be corrected to kind of come in line with what we're actually experiencing. There's a little bit of disconnect in some of our budget accounts, and my goal is to make them as close to actual as possible. A lot of what's driving this tax increase is work on real estate tax assessments in the past. Some of those real estate tax assessments come due in this coming budget year, the 23-24 budget. On the state side, the last year, Governor Wolf passed his budget after our budget was already approved, so it did not take into account approximately $600,000 in additional state subsidies and special ed subsidies. So this isn't new subsidies for this year. This is subsidies we need to build in our budget going into 23-24, and hopefully we'll see additional subsidies on top of that. So that was a nice gift that kind of came at the 11th hour. On the federal side, we aren't really experiencing a decrease in revenue. This budget does not include ESSER. ESSER will be budgeted separately because it is a net wash, revenue coming in, expenditures coming out. And this budget purely looks at what our structural deficit is, minus what that one-time ESSER money influx is. And again, we talked about the fund balance to balance the budget. I thought it important to take I'm sure you've seen a chart like this many times in the past. I thought it important to take a step back and take a look at where does our money come from. 72% of our revenue comes from real estate taxes, homeowners, businesses. The other 7% is made up of our mercantile taxes, our earned income taxes. So almost 80% of our revenues are purely from our local tax base. So that's probably a little higher than a lot of other school districts in the area. North of us, it's probably in line, but right around the city, this is a little higher of a percentage. State sources, this is our contribution from the state in terms of subsidy. They account for 21% of our budget. And on the federal side, it says 0. It's actually right around 0.5%, but it's barely registered. So any given year, we get about $500 million of title monies, which doesn't move the needle tremendously for the district. So I believe I went through all of these items already, but they're referenced. All right, the expenditure side is much simpler. We started off with $127 million. the entire $2.5 million increase in the budget is almost entirely salaries. So you may be asking, $2.6 million seems like a very large number for professional staff. Well, when we passed the 22-23 budget, our professional staff salaries were budgeted flat because the contract with those groups were not settled. So when we do the 23-24 budget, I have to build in the 22-23 increases in salaries and I have to build in the 23-24 increases in salaries. So this really represents 2 years of salary increases on our professional contracts. I just want to make that clear so that when we think about next year, we're not thinking automatically that we're going to have a $3 million increase in salaries and structurally built into the budget. All right, so provide the same graph on the expenditure side. Again, the school district is its employees, its salaries, its benefits, which is over 70%. 67% of our entire budget. I did briefly mention PSERS did decrease. That rate decrease was not, from my understanding, so much a matter of performance of the stock market, but more an actuarial calculation of the number of people in the plan and the anticipated need to draw on fund in the future based on the demographics of the plan. So that decrease is very, very welcome and pretty much offsets the increase of PSERS from the increase in salaries moving forward this year. Our health insurance premiums increased 7% for our first look. We still don't have our second look. 7% is low for Cheltenham for the past several years. And there was enough money in the budget between the mix of number of those enrolled in the plan, the increase that it had a minimal impact on our budget for this year. And already discussed. All right, so before we leave the preliminary budget, any questions on where we're at this point? Yes, let's start with you.
Transportation. I know that I'm just forgetting we had an updated contract. I believe it was steep increase at first. When does that kick in? Would that be?
That'll be 23-24.
That will
There's
be
a 10%.
for what we're budgeting. Does that, I know, I imagine that's reflected, but it wasn't, I asked because it wasn't listed in the, as an increase in expenditure unless it's part of the salary or part of the professional.
So we were quite a bit under budget last year. And when I projected forward, we remained under budget. So rather than projecting a future budget increase, we just came up with $8 million surplus. I was just able to absorb that increase.
That's great.
In the current budget.
That like, perfect.
But there was an increase.
I wanted to make sure I was mentally mapping because I knew the first increase was in March, but I wanted to remember if it was this budget or a future budget. So thank you.
In ballpark figures, what would the fund balance be if we take the $2.6 million, both remaining dollar-wise and also percentage-wise, as compared to our budget?
So we have $24 million in our fund balance. That includes our unassigned and are yet to be assigned. We haven't closed the audit, so we haven't made a decision. The board hasn't made a decision on what we're going to do with that money. Do we transfer it to cap reserve for future projects? Do we keep it in the general fund and use it as a tax stabilization fund? That decision still has to be made.
Okay. And my other point is, I don't want to get on too much of a soapbox. I'm always going PSERS drops, but the PSERS rate is still, which is out of our control, but still incredibly high. I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, it is. I mean, you get 50% reimbursement from the state. It's still an incredibly large piece of our budget. Yes.
Thank you.
The good news is we're at the top of that hill. So when we talk about future budgets, we're not talking about 10% increases in our PSERS rate. We're talking about 2%.
The expenditure pie chart for this proposed or the preliminary budget for next year. So I guess the repairs and things that are being made to the current, buildings, where does that factor in on this pie chart? Because is property,
Property is designated for capitalizable items. So if we buy like a truck or we buy something that rises to a level or a capitalization threshold, we would budget for it properly. Property, we don't typically budget for things in the property category because we do have capital reserve monies. We have about $14 million in capital reserve money. So it wouldn't be necessary to take it out of our regular budget and account for it that way.
So it decreases our cap reserve fund balance part of our fund.
Correct.
Remembered my other question that I didn't mention, I forgot, but does this incorporate potential or projected attritional savings, so retirements or anything for positions that we aren't planning to fill?
There's no attrition built into this budget, as well as no column movement for credit for tuitions.
Okay.
So the thought is they will wash, but that's difficult to calculate.
Understood. And I also understand this is a preliminary budget, and I just wanted to, again, for over the coming months. Question around the capital reserve. Is it, one of the things that came out of it, I think we had a couple studies done around expected maintenance or routine maintenance and X numbers of billions, millions of dollars over the next 5 years. I know we're doing a 20-year plan, that's probably gonna be part of that. Is it, do any districts bake in land costs like that into a budget? Or is it usually just a capital reserve that is whatever's there, is what we have?
Well, a lot of school districts, if they have in a good year with surplus, they push that money into capital reserve for those type items to take care of those one-off type expenditures without having to build it into the budget and ask for taxpayer relief, instant taxpayer relief for it that may come and go. So to answer your question, that it's usually done that way. It would be part of the capital budget. Now, the PD does not require we create a capital budget. Is it the best practice? Absolutely.
Okay. And the reason I ask is just if there were, it always occurred to me, one way to sort of ensure that routine preventative maintenance occurs would be to make sure it's budgeted somewhere or somehow. And it always seemed like we weren't doing that as far as that was concerned. So thanks.
And the district did invest in the asset count, the MG software, which put that together. So it would make sense to bring that up to the budget moving forward.
Thank you.
Yes, Joe.
Yes, the 24 million in the fund balance, that's a lot. I mean, we haven't had that much, which is a good thing, for a while. Do you know what percentage of our budget that?
It is. Someone's gonna do this.
Because I know we're,
For like
I think,
17%.
It's about 18%.
okay.
In his head, Dan said 17%.
You updated to 70.
For the record, it was wrong. I rounded, so you might have right.
Thank you.
So per the Department of Education, when we prepare our budget, we're not allowed to exceed 8%. So
It's 8%, right?
it's 8% of the budget. So we have to make a decision of what we want to do with anything over the 8%. 8% can remain in unassigned to be used for future purposes, and the rest has to be designated for some purpose. And the best practice would be to marry that designated purpose with the capital plan. So or a tax stabilization fund or whatever the board decides.
I was just going to follow up on that term, which I had not heard until you uttered it a few minutes ago. Tax stabilization fund is the idea being that we can use fund balance to ensure that we don't have to raise taxes. And is that in a separate category of fund balance? Like, or is it just unassigned fund balance?
It could be unassigned. It could be an unofficial title. It could be an assigned, which is a loose commitment for fund balance.
I mean, that would be something really interesting to talk about publicly if we were making a decision to do that. We've never been in a position since I've been here to even think about having that kind of public discussion. so heavily taxed and just, property values are lower because of it. If we could actually make an intentional decision, if we decide that's the right thing to do, the administration thinks it's the right thing to do, then I'm just intrigued by that concept. So just.
My concern is that we tread carefully with the recommendation in that I don't want to see the public go, well, give us the money back. And or go down the road that Laura Marion went down, where we have some huge amount of funds, or we're not doing things the appropriate way, that cause similar problems.
So we're not going to be in that danger.
But even perception or appearance wise or pressure from the public. So it just would urge some caution in the way we would present information to the public that we have this money and not have to come across with flush with money. And again, if people figure we pounded down doors with pitchforks saying, give me the money back.
There's enough need facility wise.
I was gonna say, I just heard a whole presentation about facility stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, if we started saving 10 million a year towards building a building that we don't have to finance, that would be a really good thing, right?
I only mentioned it because I think it's worth talking about.
Sure.
As you mentioned, this that we have the highest tax rate in Montgomery County. And we wouldn't be responsible if we didn't consider all possibilities for this.
I tried to, I know this is preliminary, but I think that if we can do a 0% increase, obviously that's great, but I think we should certainly promote that in an effective way and try to get good mileage out of it in terms of public perception. And I don't think it's going to really appease as many people as maybe we want to appease, because people still be, we're still got the highest tax rate, but at least try to get good mileage out of it communication wise.
All right, any more questions on the preliminary budget?
Only timeline wise for the board to understand, what are the next steps in this discussion and what kind of feedback are you looking for?
So I will put on the board agenda the approval of the preliminary budget. We submit that. And then obviously in June, we approve the final budget after probably posting it available.
And just to reiterate, that approval of the preliminary budget is almost just a procedural thing. It's get it out there for public awareness, but it's not the approval of the budget, of course.
When is that? Is that April or what month is that?
The final budget?
No, the preliminary budget.
February 21st.
Oh, and this, that, okay, thank
I think
you.
it's technically due on the 20th, but PD will carry it.
Something that was helpful in the last one was the schedule was a part of the presentation. And so if we got rid of slide 6 and put the schedule in there, as opposed to
You're a zero-sum slide.
All right, there are no other questions. I'll move on to capital planning and the architectural work. We kind of touched on this before. As administration, we can put together a capital plan moving forward, but as a due diligence and best practice, we do need professionals to vet our plan and to kind of be our expert witness before we take it forward. And obviously, there are certain aspects of the plan that will require professional input. So step number 1 is feasibility study that was released in early January. I had 16 firms respond to be interested in becoming Cheltenham School District's new architectural and engineering consultant for any sort of feasibility plan moving forward. Of those 16 firms that responded, 6 have toured district facilities. I don't know that all of them will respond to the RFP, but I imagine that they all will. And those proposals will be worked with. Once we get those proposals, we will form a committee of the board, which will probably be facilities and finance team members, to interview the respondents. I will take that list of 6 and boil it down to 3, and we'll interview them and make a decision going forward, which we feel will best represent the school. If anyone wants to be part of reviewing any of the other RFP respondents, please reach out. You're more than welcome to be part of the process.
Can I request, can I get a copy of the RFP?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on the architecture? RFP?
Just one is there a reason that only 6 toured the facility? Was that our selection or that just 6 showed up?
So with most, a little more than 6 showed up, but from reviewing the background of all requested a tour of facilities, some of them focused primarily in other states. Their area of focus wasn't necessarily primarily school district, so I weeded them out. Because when we come down to the next process, which would be the interview process, and we're evaluating criteria based on resume and experience of the person assigned to the school district and those factors, they're gonna.
That's what the
they're gonna
criteria-
automatically convert to one.
That's fine, I'm just curious.
One comment that I know is already on your radar, but I wanted to say it. Or I know that the township is also undergoing a lot of facilities future thinking. And so we should all be aware that there might be room or might not be room for collaboration on certain aspects. Yeah, that's all.
Just a quick question in terms of the RFP process. I know that we have the policy that talks about soliciting RFPs from minority-owned firms, women-owned firms, Cheltenham-based firms. How did we kind of address that issue for that policy?
So the firms that toured the school district, that was taken into consideration when reviewing partners of the firm. If I'm being honest, there's not a lot of diversity in the school district architecture firm, but I do my best to pick as much diversity as possible.
Appreciate that.
Any other questions on the RFP process?
She, just on Mrs. Haywood's point, is this a case, because I know we've talked about this in the past, this is a case where they came from like the approved campus?
Co-stars?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a professional service and it doesn't follow those bid restrictions. It's strictly being a professional service, but it's always best practice to go RFP and ask what their price is going to be, most cost effective moving forward.
Oh, yeah, no, I get that. That was really in, because I know you mentioned last time, that was actually a function to meet that policy requirement. I think CoStar had some way of like filtering based upon diversity or something. We don't need to go any more.
Sure, no, I hear you loud and clear and always looking for. Any other questions on the RFP? Moving on to the Church Road expansion project next to Winco. So this project has been underway through PennDOT since 2019. We're now just entering the phase where PennDOT is trying to come to an agreement with how they're going to secure and procure the property needed in order to complete the project. So PennDOT reached out with plans, reached out with the amount of land required to complete this project. It's approximately a quarter acre on the corner of Winco as outlined in the map up there, enough for a sidewalk and an easement for stormwater here in the back is a little thicker. So this project will require any real estate transaction, the school district will require board approval. There is a value assigned that we're still negotiating with PennDOT in exchange for the land that I'm working with Ed to come up with an appraisal and reasonable value for the board as well. They are looking for a tight timeframe to move forward, and that's in May. So there will be more board action on this.
And understanding that, I mean, I know this project has been in the works for years and years and years. Winco's footprint is not very large. And I just am curious in terms of, I mean, you can see when you zoom in, it's like the playground and then there's a wall and a drop off to the road pretty much. So I'm just curious, like, how does that, I'm not an I don't know anything about this, you know, I'm not an engineer, but just, I'm assuming they're going to do things the right way so that it doesn't affect the, no, I can zoom in on it.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, I can see it, but I'm just, you know, again, there's a fence and a giant retaining wall, and I'm just kind of like imagining, like, if the road is cutting in, what does the project really look like in terms of how it impacts the school footprint and the playground and all that?
We're on the same page. So
Okay,
Tim and I took a trip out there with PennDOT, with our own civil engineer,
Okay,
to review the plans, review the site, review the impact. So what it is it's making the slope from the fence to the road gentler and providing almost a concrete barrier wall to kind of fill that slope so it isn't, you know, straight cut on the side of the hill. And then there's the addition of a sidewalk.
which is, I mean, the sidewalk is certainly needed, the widening road is needed, but.
The biggest shame is all the trees would probably fall into this.
That is terrible, because it does actually.
So, I'm sorry. to interrupt.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
So the reason, there's two ways PennDOT can go about acquiring this property. They can reach an agreed upon settlement with the school district, or they can just come in and take it from me. So this is the first route they're trying to go.
Yeah.
And you just
That's
had,
a really important point.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm glad you took the field trip. Thank you.
Yeah, so following up on those comments, it would be good if at some point that there could be conversations with PennDOT, not to be onerous, and also part of the school district's responsibility, but to make sure right now there are the trees, but there's also this overgrowth vegetation there. I drive by there pretty often, and it would be good if it could be a better environment for both the school, but also for the community in terms of after they do their work and grind the road, put the sidewalk in, if there can also just be a better improvement versus just having overgrown brush on the side of the property. And I guess a question rhetorically is, or to think about is, how much can we try to get PennDOT to do things that might be outside their ideal scope of work versus how much of it would fall in the school district versus how much of it would just not be done?
It's a great question, pretty serious. Thoughts.
So we're at the point where PennDOT is making an offer to acquire the land, and we have a counter. And then the counter is we accept their offer, or we say we think this is going to be interfere with our operations, and we want this, and this. So we're at that. So if that's a consideration, we can make it part of the demand and part of the negotiating process. If that doesn't work, then
Well, I certainly don't want to throw a monkey wrench in, and ultimately PennDOT's going to get the ground. And I guess it's a combination, probably maybe a question for Ed, which is how much do we negotiate versus how much of it do we just get maybe a good faith agreement that they'll work? Because again, I don't know what the drawings are, whether they're engineering drawings now, what the timetable is. And I certainly want to be respectful of PennDOT in the process, both in terms of acquiring the ground and also their planning, construction, development. But at the same time, I would like to try to make sure there's a better end result versus what we have now on the side of the property.
But just from my perspective, those are really reasonable asks. And they are going to have to be taking down shrubbery. So asking them to replace taking down shrubbery with different, better, more thoughtful shrubbery is not huge. That seems to be in the
Compensating
scope of
for
what they would do.
I think it's required for version
Yeah.
control, but I just don't know what it looks like. I think there's an aesthetic piece to it as well.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a very minor, I mean, it's important, but the trees that we're losing. I wonder if there's any ways we can plan to offset the loss somehow, be it elsewhere in the district or Curtis Arboretum or something along those lines. It's a small thing, but I think in the past when we had projects that involve losing trees, we tried to make sure to do that.
Maybe we can put them on the inside. Sure.
And the other question, well, two other aspects. One is the trees and seeing if those can be replaced, not with necessarily like trees, because that would be cost prohibitive and unreasonable, but also looking at, will there be an impact on the building in terms of sound? Because I'm asking for a sound barrier, but the road, and I assume, is the road being widened as well as the sidewalk? So the road will be that much closer to the building. If the trees go down, that's going to move part of the natural buffer for the building. So I do have questions on some level about will there be an impact to the school in terms of operations, or at least environmentally in terms of the sounds emanating from the road if we A, get the road that much closer to the building, and B, B, there's a lack of trees. They're attacked to some of the natural buffer.
Is this what site planning is?
So when I was looking at this, is the side, so the widening of the road, would that continue all the way up to Rice's Mill Road?
Yes, we have a sidewalk that ends right on Price's Mill there in the corner.
Right.
It would carve into that corner bank, continue that sidewalk all the way down the side of our property,
And how far would it go down in church?
the whole way to the end of our property.
Not even beyond that, right? So
If it's beyond that, I'm not aware of it. If it's another project.
Yeah,
it's
I
really
think,
bizarre because there's no, I mean,
There's no.
I'm not a architect, but if there's no sidewalk that continues down to even that intersection of Ashmore and of
Greenwood.
Greenwood, I should know, I live around the corner, right? It makes no sense why they would have a sidewalk from the
It goes
end
nowhere, the
of,
sidewalk to nowhere.
yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure, and I'm not positive, I followed this project, it's been literally in various stages of planning for 20 years. I'm pretty sure the plans had to go down to Greenwood and also to sidewalks in different parts of Greenwood to enable people to get from Greenwood over to the Arboretum. So I believe that's the part of the intentionality. Now, ironically, at some point, the sidewalk does have to end, but I think at least it will go down to Greenwood and connect
To the
the
Greenwood.
school
But you
down
still
down
have,
down
like,
down to the Arboretum.
Right, and would have to be, because otherwise you, if it stopped there at Greenwood, you'd have to cross traffic and go up on the barrier to get to Curtis Arboretum. There's no sidewalk there.
Well, there will at least, what they're saying is be a sidewalk, at least at all four corners, to enable people to walk from Greenwood and I believe also from Winkin Elementary onto the Arboretum property, onto the Curtis property.
So they're gonna have to acquire additional,
Yeah, they're taking a fair chunk of Curtis Arboretum for the widening, and they might be taking some other properties, I believe, including part of the reconstructionist rabbinical college.
yeah, because that's where the sidewalk is. So I would have the same concerns that David has in terms of, difference between having a retainer wall that's not so nice versus having trees there, if it has the same, both, I mean, aesthetically, trees would obviously be a preference. But if in fact we're losing and gaining some additional sound because the traffic's closer to the school, then whatever would be recommended as the best mix for us, but that it still would be more aesthetically pleasing to have trees there, if possible. That end up in school.
A new high school building.
Yes.
All right.
But I do know that we have to keep in mind the balance of the negotiation versus their power for eminent domain.
Any other questions on the road widening project? All right, moving on to other, we discussed briefly the MCIU member services budget that requires board approval. Total budget was $55,000, which represents a $5,000 increase or 5% increase from the prior year. The other two items for board approval are professional appraiser contracts. As everyone's aware, we do enter into various reverse tax appeal suits each year. So we need two professionals for that. We need a property advisor who kind of advises on a district-wide basis. And for a specific case, we can approve a property-specific appraiser. It is a unique property type, so it requires a unique set of skills to evaluate. So any other questions on these other items?
You may not have the answer to this, but the 5% increase, how does that, and maybe Jenny knows, compare to other districts? Are we roughly in line, or is it higher or lower?
We're a tad more.
Okay.
But 3 to 5%.
With the appraisers, is the township paying part of that cost?
I believe that we take on the appraiser costs.
Okay.
But I'll check with that because I know Ed splits his time on certain occasions. I don't know if the direct cost for the appraisal is part of that.
I mean, I would argue that probably should be from my perspective.
20%.
Because they get a portion of part of the benefit from it.
He might, I just don't know.
Okay, thank you.
It's a
Any other questions? If not, presentation number 2, go begin.
It's an accident, I went scrubbing. Let me see what else is there. Thank you. I was like,
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have, no other board, are there any other board questions? Do we have any members of the community? Any hands raised? Or anybody? I know we don't have anybody out here. You didn't look that way, John. I didn't see nobody there.
Is anybody man the Zoom room?
There's no one in the chat. All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.